Hi, I'm Pastor Kerry. Before we get started, there are a few things I want to encourage you to have on hand. First, I want to encourage you to have a set of the sermon notes. If you don't already have them, you can go to the link that's right down below the video. It'll take you to a place where you can print a set of the sermon notes for yourself. Also want to encourage you to have some communion elements. You'll want to have some bread or a cracker. You'll want to have some juice or some wine. And if you don't have juice or wine, probably any beverage would suffice. But you'll want to have those communion elements because here in about 20 minutes, when we get to the end of the sermon, we'll move right into a time of communion with you. So if you need any of those things, I would encourage you to pause the video right now. Grab whatever you need. Once everything is ready, then go ahead and resume the playback. Hey, and just a quick programming note, I wanted to share with you something that I found amusing today. So you might have noticed that over the past couple of weeks with these recorded online sermons, you might have noticed that I was kind of having to wipe the sweat off my brow or wipe the sweat off my upper lip as I was recording. I think I mentioned that specifically a couple of weeks ago. And you might have heard me saying, I have no idea why this is happening because it is the middle of winter, it's freezing outside, and the heat in the church is turned off. Even so, I was in here sweating as I was recording these videos, and I was telling you, I don't know why this is happening. Well, I found out today that apparently there seems to be a steam leak here in the church, and so that is why it's been rather humid in the church and humid here in the library as I have been attempting to record these videos. As far as I can tell and as far as I can feel in here right now, the steam leak has not been resolved, so at some point during the next 20 minutes you will probably see me wipe my brow, wipe my upper lip. I apologize in advance. Hopefully the steam leak here in the church will be fixed by the time you watch the next video. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, if we took a person from 100 years ago, let's say we go back to the year 1924, and we just pluck up a person and we brought them to the year 2024. And we had them take a look around. What do you think a person from 100 years ago would think about our world that we live in 100 years later? You know, I am a firm believer that if you want to learn what our culture, what our society prioritizes, all you have to do is walk in the front door of a convenience store. Because when you walk in the front door of a convenience store, you find out what the typical average American wants quickly. So think about it. When you walk in the front door of a convenience store, or let's say we take that person from the year 1924 and walk with them in the front door of a convenience store, what do you think they would learn about us as they observed everything inside a convenience store? I have a feeling that they would think, wow, in the year 2024, those modern Americans really must love their lottery cards. And those modern Americans must really love their alcohol. And those modern Americans really must love their sugar, because there can be donuts and there are going to be all sorts of candies and mints and everything else, and they would probably think, and wow, those modern Americans, they really love their snack chips. Those modern Americans really must love their beef jerky, which might come as a surprise to them, since after all, beef jerky has been popular 100 or 200 years ago, and yet here we are in 2024 and we still love our beef jerky. But you know, the one thing that we haven't mentioned yet that probably would jump out at them, I would argue even the most, is how much we love our beverages, and specifically we love our caffeinated beverages. Because think about it, when you walk in the front door of a convenience store, yes, you see the lottery cards and you see the alcohol and you see the snack chips and you see the candy and you see the donuts, but you also immediately see a display for Red Bull, or you see a display for a Monster energy drink or for Rockstar energy drink. And then when you look to the back of the store, what's the back of the store? The back of the store, the entire walls of the back of the store is nothing but walls of beverages. And the vast majority of those beverages are either alcohol or they are caffeinated beverages. And if you want to skip over the drinking of a large quantity of liquid in order to ingest that caffeine, good for you that we have the 5-hour energy drink shots where you just take a little tiny beverage and you just gulp it down in one gulp, and there's all of the caffeine that would otherwise take you a big coffee or a big Rockstar or whatever. And as I'm saying all of this to you, I want you to know that I am just as guilty as everybody else. I will tell you, I will confess to you right up front that every morning before I come to the church office, I stop at the convenience store at 13th and South, and I get myself a big thing of Mountain Dew Code Red. So I am the pot calling the kettle black here. I am just as guilty as everybody else. And I wonder if that person from 1924 would say, wow, is there something that has gone wrong with the human metabolism in the year 2024 that they have a need to ingest all of this caffeine? They have a severe lack of energy that causes them to need to get caffeinated and to get sugared up just so that they can make it through the day. And look, friends, the reason that I am kind of poking fun at our modern culture and poking fun at myself is because, and the passage that we're going to look at today, in the lectionary passage for February the 4th of 2024, what we're going to discover is that there is a source of all of the strength that you and I need, a divine source of that strength. So, having said that, let's go ahead and take a look at that lectionary Old Testament reading. It happens to be Isaiah chapter 40, verses 21 through 31, and my guess is that by the time we get to the end of this passage, you're going to be thinking to yourself, oh yeah, I know that passage. I know this passage well. So, let's jump right in. Isaiah 40, verse 21. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. God stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground, than God blows on them, and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one, and calls forth each of them by name, because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. May God bless the reading of the powerful and inspiring word. So like I said, by the time we got to the end of the passage, you were thinking to yourself, oh yeah, those who hope in the Lord, they will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. I know that. And so, what I'd like to do right now is what we always do. I want to go ahead and talk through the passage, and I want to help us to understand what Isaiah was trying to convey in this passage some 2,700 years ago when it was written. And then after we talk through the passage, what I want to do is I want to discuss three of the many important reminders this passage has for us. So, of course, this passage is attributed to Isaiah. You know that Isaiah is the longest of the prophetic books in the Old Testament. And this particular passage is divided into 3 stanzas. Verses 21 through 24 is the first stanza, verses 25 and 26, that's the second stanza, verses 27 through 31, that is the third stanza. So let's take a look at the first stanza. How does it start? Well, the first stanza starts with a hypothetical question, because the prophet is asking us, don't you know? Haven't you heard? Hasn't it been said since the beginning? Hasn't it been understood since the earth was founded? And of course, the answer to that rhetorical question is yes, we know. Yes, we've heard. Yes, it has been understood since the beginning. And then the prophet shifts and starts talking about the Creator and says that the Creator, that God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, says that God stretches out the heavens like a canopy. This is beautiful poetry by the prophet here. It says that that we are grasshoppers in comparison, compared to the majesty of the heavens and all of the creation, we're like grasshoppers. And you know what? I can't argue with that. That sounds about right. And then the prophet has some very interesting things to say about rulers. Now, I want to remind you of the context in which this was written, because 2,700 years ago, the nation of Israel was no more. The nation of Israel had experienced its golden age and was now in severe decline. The nation of Israel had now splintered into a northern kingdom, a southern kingdom, and in the northern kingdom and in the southern kingdom, you just had this succession of not so great kings. Some of the kings were good, some of the kings were so-so, a lot of the kings weren't good. Not only that, but now Israel is finding themselves vulnerable to the larger nations around them. And at this point, some of these kings, these evil kings of these larger nations, are already sending their people in to carry away the Hebrews, carry away the former Israelites into captivity in their nations. So the prophet is not really big on rulers at this point. But what Isaiah says here is that, you know, those rulers, that as far as God is concerned, that God brings them to nothing. Says, as soon as they're planted, they are uprooted. They wither and they blow away with the next wind. So tell us how you really feel about princes and about kings and rulers, Isaiah. So that's the first stanza. Now, we said that the first stanza started with a hypothetical question, and guess what? The second stanza starts with a hypothetical question as well. Except now, Isaiah is speaking for God. And so God, through Isaiah, is now asking this hypothetical question, to whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal? Says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? Well, we know the answer to that question. We can't compare God to anyone. And we know that it is God who created everything. And then Isaiah goes on to talk about God for the remainder of this short middle stanza and says that God brings out the stars and has named every one of them, which, again, beautiful and a really cool poetic image. All right, so now let's move on to the final stanza. First stanza started with the hypothetical question. Second stanza started with a hypothetical question. The third stanza starts with a question as well, but in this case, it's not hypothetical. In this case, Isaiah is asking a very direct question of his fellow Hebrews. Now, he refers to his fellow Hebrews as Jacob. He refers to his fellow Hebrews as Israel. But he's talking to all of them, talking to them in the northern kingdom, talking to them in the southern kingdom, and says, why are you complaining? Why do you say to God, my way is hidden from the Lord because my cause is disregarded by God? Why are you having a pity party? Why do you feel like God has abandoned you? And then Isaiah asks the hypothetical question that started all of this. He repeats the hypothetical question, verse 21. Do you not know? Have you not heard? And then Isaiah goes on to talk about the fact that God is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. God doesn't grow tired or weary. No one can understand everything that God understands. But then Isaiah actually ends this passage on a note of hope and says, but the same God that you are questioning, the same God that you know is the creator of everything, and we're grasshoppers by comparison, now I just want to remind you that God is willing to give us the divine strength that only God can give us. And says, you know how little kids are. They run around all day. It seems like their energy is endless. But you know that even little kids, that eventually they run out of steam. He says, and you know how it was when you were a young adult. It seemed like you were absolutely unstoppable. He says, but eventually, even as a young adult, you eventually got tired. Says, not God. Says, those who put their hope in the God whose power is limitless, that they will renew their strength. They'll soar on wings like eagles. They'll run and never get tired. They'll walk and never run out of steam. So again, beautiful, poetic passage that ends on a hopeful note. And so how should we respond to this passage? There are many, many nuggets of wisdom in this passage, but we're going to focus quickly on three. And the first important reminder this passage has for us is this: God is actively involved in our world. God is actively involved in our world. Where do we see that? Well, actually we see that throughout this passage, but what I want to point out to you is what Isaiah says in verses 23 and 24, where he talks about the princes of this world and says, look, the prince is, the prince is plural in this world, that, yeah, they rise up and then they're gone. And what Isaiah is saying is that God's hand is in that. And I think it's a good reminder for many of us, including myself, because for a lot of us, when we think about this world that we live in, I think for some of us, and again, maybe this is more true for me than it is for you, but sometimes I have a tendency to think that God has set this world in motion, but God then has taken a step back and is kind of hands off. And then it's human will that steps in. And it's kind of up to me, and it's kind of up to you, and it's kind of up to all of us how this world plays out. And I would argue that there is some truth to that. I would argue that for someone who says, well, when this person did that, that was God's will. And when that person did that, that was God's will. And respectfully, I disagree. When this person has done something awful to someone else, I don't believe that's God's will. And when that person has done something awful to you, or when that person did something awful to me, I don't think that's God's will. But there's also a temptation then, if you want to attribute everything to a human will, to say that God is hands off with the creation. And Isaiah is saying very clearly that God is not hands off with the creation. And it's probably a good reminder for me, anyway, and it's probably a good reminder for many of the people watching this video as well, that God is actively involved. And that God answers our prayers, and that when we go to God with this issue or that issue, that there are plenty of times, countless times, infinite times, that God intervenes in the creation. And so you and I should continue to pray and continue to trust that God is going to intervene. And when we go to God in prayer, we can trust that those prayers are heard and those prayers are answered. So that is the first truth. And you know what I'm going to do for time's sake, because I'm running short? I'm going to combine the second and the third. The second important reminder this passage has for us is that God is all-powerful. And again, in this passage, it talks about, in verse 26, it talks about God's great power and mighty strength. Down in verse 28, it says that God does not grow tired or weary. There is a theological term for God being all-powerful. You've heard this term before. In fact, you might be able to say it out loud right now before I say it. And the term for God being all-powerful is, that's right, you got it, omnipotence. God is omnipotent. And let's jump right in then to the third truth or reminder this passage has for us. And God's power is available to us. God's power is available to us. Friends, that is the reason so many of us are familiar with this passage, is because it is such an encouraging passage. It's encouraging to have Isaiah talk about, in beautiful poetic terms, about how incredible God is, about how incredible the creation is, and how we're like grasshoppers comparatively. But in spite of all of that, and in spite of the fact that we have a tendency to complain about things that we should never complain about in the first place, in spite of all of that, God still wants to make divine power available to us. Talks about how those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. So you don't have to go to the convenience store and get that next bump of caffeine or that next rush of sugar or whatever it is, or nicotine or alcohol or whatever it is that people go and get from the convenience stores, because there is a much, much greater divine source of strength, a much more important divine source of power. And that, of course, is our Creator, is the God who wants us to make it through the tough times. And so, very quickly, because I am out of time, I just want to say, for many of the people that are watching this, I know that you are in a good place, and I'm glad for that. But my guess is that there are probably a few people who are going to watch this video today, and the fact is you are tired. The fact is you're weary. Maybe you've been dealing with some sort of health issue that you're battling. Maybe there is a relationship issue in your life. Maybe there are financial issues. Maybe there are addiction issues. I don't know what is causing you to carry around a heavy load right now, but the fact is, for some people watching this, you are carrying around a heavy load, and you're tired, and you're weary. And I want you to know that if you go to God and say, God, I need your divine strength. I can't do this. I can't handle this anymore. I promise you that God will give you the strength that you need. It doesn't mean that God's going to solve that problem overnight, but I promise you that God will give you the strength that you need to continue to deal with it and hopefully, ultimately, to overcome it. And friends, I've gone way too long in the sermon. Let's go ahead and move into our time of communion, and I'd remind you of the words of institution from 1 Corinthians. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink in remembrance of me." And right now, I'd invite you to grab your communion elements, and I'll go ahead and grab mine. And before the video cuts me off, I'm going to invite you to partake with me at this time. The body of Christ, broken for us, we partake in remembrance of him. And the blood of Christ, shed for us, we drink in remembrance of him. Let's pray. God, we